Okay, and welcome back to another episode of the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm your host, Dan Nash, and I'm joined by co-host Owain Zarelli. Owain, how are you doing today?
Not bad. Yeah, not bad. How are you?
Yeah, good. Ready to talk about supplements and accessories. I would say supplements and accessories today is what we're going to talk about. So ones that have been, we've picked out 4 supplements / accessories which have either been in the headlines recently at the Olympics, or just more been trending, I think, more into people's consciousness over the last couple of years. And we're gonna dissect them. What's the evidence behind them? Do they work? Do they not? If they do work, what sort of performance advantage are they going to give you, and what are the risks, I guess? And just like practically, like if we think there's something that that actually can make a difference to your performance, what sort of events is it gonna make a performance difference in, and actually how should you go about using it? So should we just dive in? So do you want to introduce our first accessory / supplement?
Yeah, so we decided to go from most expensive to least expensive, and also this is probably the most recent I guess news story. So we're going to start with the cooling headbands that were on the heads of some athletes at the Olympic marathon. The big names, I guess, are Kipchoge, Sifan Hassan, Bashir Abdi, I think, had one on as well. So second place in the men's marathon and first in the women's marathon were wearing these headbands. The headbands is made by a brand called Owain from Mexico. And they've been around a while. Like, I know triathletes have been using them a while. Part of the research for this, I found a post on the Slow Twitch forums, which is a mainly triathlon forum from 2020, talking about these headbands. They've been around a while. Some of the triathletes Dan's worked with have been wearing them quite a long time.
It must be like 3 or 4 years ago I first became aware of. Well, I first saw them for the first time with one of the athletes I was working with. So they have been around for a bit of time, but definitely come to prominence over the Olympics. I mean, that's the first time I think they probably have a mainstream exposure, at least in like the running community. One other to add, I did a bit of research. One of our runner was Richard Ringer, who was the only European, I think. Well, Bashir Abdi as well, but he was 12th in the Olympic marathon, 2:09. It's a very good run. But yeah, I think they're the 4. I think I saw.
I mean, I noticed them, but then, sort of already knowing a bit about them, I was like, oh yeah, sort of whatever. And then it blew up, didn't it? Like, it was immediately, you were seeing like people tweeting about the price, which we're going to talk about in a second. There was, memes about them, being like, oh, you're going to see these at like Park Run or whatever the next week.
Runners World.
Runners World were all over it. So with these headbands, they have loads of little squares. They're I think they're not 3D printed. They're little squares.
They're graphite cubes, I'd say. So if you haven't seen a picture, it's like it's just like you want to be the buff bands, the tube bands that you have, but on the front it's got multiple of these graphite cubes.
And what the maker Omius say is that each of those cubes, it touches your head on the inside of the band, and it essentially increases the surface area, 5 times the amount of surface area, which then they're saying increases the surface area for cooling. So the sort of main way that you cool yourself down when it's hot is through your skin and through the evaporation of water, or through the evaporation of sweat off of your skin. So what they're saying is that if you have these cubes touching your skin, it increases the surface area. They're saying the headband provides 100 square inches of surface area for cooling. So that's 5 times the amount that you get across your forehead. They also mention that they say there's certain areas of the body where if you can cool those areas, they have a bigger effect than other areas of the body for cooling. So, if you're thinking like, why don't you literally wear these cubes across your entire body? They're saying that the forehead is one area where there's greater benefits to be had if you cool it more. In terms of, just looking into this, so they're saying there's 100 square inches of surface area they're providing for cooling. Your whole body, an average body is about 3,200 square inches. So straight off the bat, it's only 2.5% of your surface area from this headband. So even if it's amazing, it's not that much. Like it's still a thin strip of cooling area. It's not, massive.
That was my initial thought when I went onto the website. Yeah. So yeah, increase it by 5. Increases surface area by 5%. I was like, yeah, but we've got
a small surface area.
It's a very small surface area you're increasing it by. But I think from my understanding, they're like semi-porous, and so but actually the water gets your sweat, or if you it also says about actually just making sure that they stay moist. But the idea is that your sweat will get absorbed into these cubes and then evaporate off of that, and those cubes will cool down, and then from conduction will then cool your head as well. Yeah. So have we talked about the price point yet?
Yeah. So I've seen anywhere from like 180 to 200 pounds for the headband. So expensive. I mean, we'll come on to that in the drawbacks in a minute. So then in terms of the science, because that's why people are listening to us, there's one study that we could both find. We can't find anything else. One study where the authors have no conflicts of interest. I mean, I couldn't even see a study that was like funded by the company. Like
it must have either not published it, or maybe they've done a research and they just not published it because it wasn't great findings. But they're making them somewhere. But
that's it's a trend it's a thing in sports science, isn't it? Like we'll come on to Bicarb. There's going to be studies that Morton have done with the shoes. There's always studies that Nike and I know Brooks have their own sports scientists that don't release their research. But so one study. They had pretty fit participants. I think I saw the average VO2 max of the participants was like 60. So, pretty fit participants. They did 70 minutes of submaximal running and then immediately into a 5K time trial. And it was in a heat chamber. It was 35 degrees with 55% humidity. So quite humid. And
55% was it?
Yeah. Yep.
That's actually it's not it's humid, but it's not crazy humid.
Yeah, not too bad, but it's not dry heat at the same time. Although probably I don't know, would that might have been similar to the conditions for the women's marathon, at least. That was hotter in Paris, wasn't it? So potentially fairly similar. And so their results pretty simply they found no difference in core temperature. They had the Omius headband and they had a fake headband where they basically took off the cooling blocks and then 3D printed some, just out of plastic, spray painted it and everything, so it looked exactly identical.
In the paper, in a picture, and like just look at least they look pretty identical. I wouldn't be able to tell.
So good job. And the study is actually quite nice. Like they had a familiarization visit as well, because with the 5K time trial, they didn't have any sort of feed. They could control the speed of the treadmill, but they couldn't see what speed it was going. They couldn't see how far they had gone. So it's quite nicely controlled, and a nice familiarization visit, which is always good. And I don't think it was double blinded because the researchers knew what headband they had, but the participants were blinded to the headband as well. So, fairly nicely controlled. And there was no difference across the submax running or the 5K TT in core temperature, heart rate, or RPE. So
thermal comfort as well. Thermal comfort. They didn't perceive it to be. I'm pretty sure. I think that there wasn't it.
There was a difference in starting temperature. I think was the difference, but then no difference in delta change of skin temperature. So
yeah. But actually, the ones who had the sham one had a cooler starting temperature.
Yeah,
and didn't
get. I think they mentioned for the sham one they had to put it in the fridge to make it like the same when you put it on, the same feeling when you put it on, I think was what they mentioned. But in terms of overall outcomes,
the only significant difference was perceived forehead temperature during the 70-minute run and not during a 5 kilometer time trial. But basically, so it did cool the head a bit. It just didn't, and like I think the skin temperature was reported as well, and it was forehead skin temperature was a little bit lower, but that just didn't translate into performance improvement. So even if it was like a placebo, you'd expect that to play out in the 5 kilometer time trial because they're feeling that it's cooler, they've got a cooler head, but it's still not making a difference to performance.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair comment to say that cooling your head is going to have a bigger effect than probably cooling your arm, because actually your brain's up there, and that's your ability to push yourself in the heat is very much controlled around your actually psychologically how are you feeling in terms of like your discomfort, and there's certainly lots of temperature receptors in your head and your brain. So basically conclusion is don't spend 180 to 200 pounds on a headband because you look a bit stupid and you're certainly a bit poorer, and it doesn't seem to make you any faster.
Yeah, that's the major drawback, isn't it? It's the price. On that, I quickly made a list of things that I think will improve your performance more than spending 200 pounds. So first up, a good measure of how much something costs. You could get 800 Freddos, which I think would psychologically at least improve your performance if you just have a cupboard full of 800 Freddos.
A Freddo a day would like
Freddo a day, yeah. I mean, if you've got low energy intake, then the 800 Freddos are definitely going to help. Or you finish your run, you get a Freddo when you come home. Then more running related, you could get submax and max testing at the Sport Physiology Hub, and a heart rate strap to apply your data.
And a heart rate as well.
Yeah, that's the important thing.
I was seamlessly plugged in there. I like that.
A pair of super shoes, like that's gonna, if you're not running in super shoes, don't spend 200 pounds on a cooling headband. I've also said 72 Morton gels.
That's limiting your range of super shoes you could buy. You'd have to get like a discounted second year's model.
Or if you're in a UK running club, you get your sports shoes discount.
Okay.
That probably brings it down, doesn't it?
Yeah. So the Asics are about 220 quid, aren't they?
Yeah.
So you can probably just about
free shipping as well.
Not sure if is postage and packaging including in the headband.
Yeah, I think it is.
You must pay a bit more for that. So budget might go up a bit.
Yeah. The other brief one I added was you could get 10 months of gym membership and go to the sauna, get some heat adaptions. That's definitely going to improve your heat. Oh, you're going to get some heat adaptation, maybe an increase in blood volume, which might be another episode down the line.
Yeah,
and
that's a cheap gym membership with a sauna as well.
JD gyms, I don't know if they're any good.
Saunas are there. I might join.
I'm meant to believe they do.
There's one in Merthyr, isn't there? I think. Anyway, so cool. Don't spend 200 pounds on a headband. Whatever Kipchoge does, probably not worth it. I guess another bit of evidence to say they probably don't work is that, like you said, they first appeared in triathlon, and they seem to have given them loads away for free. And now no one. I didn't see anyone in the Olympic triathlon wearing them, and it was similar conditions to a marathon. Actually, the men's was started a bit later, didn't it, because of the delay with the pool quality, with the water quality in the Seine. So no one seems to be wearing them in triathlon. And you think if they worked, triathlon are very into their kit, you'd think that technology would have stuck around. So I think conclusion: triathletes aren't wearing them. It'd be interesting to see if the world champs next year in Tokyo, if anyone's wearing them. Maybe there'll be some upgrades or maybe they'll have just given away actually more for free and they'll still be around. But I think the science suggests that they're probably not making a difference. Okay. Don't spend your money. So we've covered the Omnius headbands. What are we moving on to next?
I reckon bicarb. Bicarb's the next.
Bicarb.
Well, some forms of bicarb are really expensive. Some are really cheap.
Yeah. So bicarb, I guess where it's come to popularity more recently because of like the Morton bicarb. So the Morton gels, the same company that makes the gels, which have got their patented hydrogel system, which apparently is supposed to improve the GI distress when you're taking on high carbohydrates during a marathon or what have you, so their gel technology. But basically applied this same technology, but to using bicarb. So they've been putting bicarb tablets in this hydrogel technology, and now everybody's talking about bicarb. But I guess the history of bicarb is people have known that bicarb is been associated with performance. I mean, people have been taking it to improve performance for since like the 80s at least, I think. Like, there's definitely a lot of old literature, old research papers looking at bicarb performance. And like, I mean, I guess like to start with, like, yeah, it probably does work. There's reasonably good evidence to suggest it, but like, let's talk a bit about the mechanisms really. So in our blood, we already have like a natural level of bicarb, a bicarbonate. And the reason we do so is because bicarb is a buffer. So it's negatively charged. It can accept hydrogen ions, which are basically what acid is. Acid is hydrogen ions, and it can accept hydrogen ions, and it acts as a buffer to make sure that our blood doesn't get too acidic, basically. Like, in any context, regardless of exercise, like the pH of our body is really, really tightly regulated. So it makes sense that our body has got a system to help defend against that. Like, if we ingested something that was really acidic, or if, you know, the hydrochloric acid in our the acid in our stomach got too strong, we want to protect against that. But it's also got like performance implications as well. But actually, what it seems to do is that we have having this bicarb in our blood means that we can pull the hydrogen ions that we generate from working anaerobically through glycolysis. We can pull those hydrogen ions out of the muscle and into the blood. It sort of makes a concentration gradient where actually those hydrogen ions combine with bicarbonate, and then that effectively neutralizes the acidity. And then what happens is that, without getting too biochemically, like the bicarb and the hydrogen ions combine, that can then dissociate in the blood, and we can effectively just breathe this out as CO2 and water. So what taking bicarb does is effectively increase the capacity of this buffer system, so that actually we can then have a greater buffer capacity of our blood and actually pull out the hydrogen ions from the muscles and where they cause fatigue into the blood, where actually we don't want really acidic blood, but in terms of performance, it's not too much of an issue. We can, like I said, we can effectively neutralize it, breathe it out as CO2, and break it down into water. So that's the theory, and that's the mechanism. I think that's pretty much the decided upon mechanism of why bicarb works. But like, what does the literature actually say? Have you looked at a few studies?
Yeah, so I guess the more recent literature, especially with the Morton bicarb, definitely shows an effect on really short duration exercise, so less than 10 minutes. Where you are using those non-oxidative energy systems, and that's where you traditionally get the really big buildup of those hydrogen ions. Using especially the Morton bicarb, where you're able to take it, you don't have stomach issues before or during the event. That's where it's been shown to work. I think apart from the contemporary, it's been talked about, especially with the Olympics. There was also some more recent research that looked at longer duration exercise. So I think traditionally it's always been sort of, like I said, felt that bicarb works on those shorter duration events. But there's some more recent work that looked at 40-kilometer time trial performance. So with the participants, there's about 60 minutes of duration, and they found a significant difference with the participants using bicarb. And apart from the buffering of hydrogen ions, they also found a reduction in potassium. Potassium is normally linked to a reduction in force generation in the muscles. So that's what they sort of thought might have increased the performance over these longer durations, that you can actually still produce, you can produce more force at the end of in this case, the 40-kilometer time trial. So it's, possibly we're moving to a point where actually bicarb might become an option for people that are racing longer events. You know, up to this point, it's sort of been something for your middle distance runners, you know, even long sprint runners. We've done some work with some 400-meter runners using it, but
I think certainly like that was the background of Bicarb. It was very much like the 800-meter runners.
yeah.
But like unless I'm not sure if we've said this already, but one of the issues of taking Bicarb, because Bicarb is the same thing that you'd have in your cupboard for making cakes. Like you can get a teaspoon of it and consume it very easily, very cheaply. But the problem with that is that it gives you massive GI distress. And like it was people were using it in the 80s and 90s, and it's probably stuck around a bit, but very much in that 400, 800 space where people are thinking, right, I'm generating loads of lactate, and we need to increase our buffering of not the lactate but the hydrogen ions associated with that, because the hydrogen ions, if the acidity gets too high in the muscle, it basically shuts down the contractile machinery, and we're going to fatigue, and like that's the feeling you get at a 400, 800 race.
Yeah, it's especially that last 50 to 100 meters in those races, isn't it? Where like, you know, different discussion, but like no one's speeding up, they're all slowing down, and it's a race of who can slow down the least. And if you can push out the distance, you know, from 350 to even 360 meters of a 400, that's a worthwhile sort of thing to chase or benefit to chase. Whereas, yeah, if you're running a half marathon, probably up to this point it's not, but this is where this new piece of work has sort of shown actually maybe, yeah, if you're Dan, you're running a, you know, just over 60-minute half marathon, Bicarb might actually be worth taking as well.
Yeah, and I think the conversation has been revisited because of this step forward in technology, and it's not just Morton that have produced some like Bicarb. They've basically packaged up the Bicarb so that it's more slowly released. It gets into the stomach and doesn't just very quickly get into the stomach, and you've got now suddenly a massive influx of sodium bicarb, like, which is where it's going to basically your stomach. Like I said earlier, the pH of your body is really well regulated. So if your stomach suddenly gets a load of basically alkali in your system, response is either to throw up or have massive diarrhea, because your body wants to get rid of that. It doesn't like that. But actually packaging it up in a way that makes it much more tolerable, which there's some papers that we haven't looked about. We're not going to go into too much detail, I think, on this episode, but there are a few papers that have specifically looked at just like the GI discomfort of this packaged bicarb, and it does seem to reduce the symptoms either completely or at least quite a lot, to the point where it's much more tolerable, and actually it makes research in this area all right, because it's one thing, you know, running a 400-meter race, and then if you're going to throw up, you can go straight off into the finish line and throw up. If you're doing a marathon, a half marathon, a 10K, then you don't want any GI distress, because that's gonna be massive. So I think it has sort of catapulted the research on a bit in an area that's sort of been bubbling for since the 80s and 90s, and probably had a bit of a trough, and now is making a resurgence. So yeah, I mean for me, I sort of feel like any event where you're spending time above your threshold, it would probably make sense that bicarb is going to have effect here. Like, I mean, for me, like, I think it is going to be more suited it's going to have more effect in the middle distances, where you're having that massive elevations in pH, acidity, you know, lactate levels. But you know, I'm at nearly my max heart rate at the end of a marathon, and I'm definitely, my lactate level is not below my threshold. There's going to be some acidity in my muscle. I don't think that's the main limiting factor, but even if perceptually it feels easier, then maybe it's going to make a difference. I certainly think like in a 5K, a 10K, where, you know, if you measured your lactate at the end of a 10K, certainly a 5K, I think it would be just as high as after a 1500-meter race. It's taken longer to get to those levels, but at the end of a race, I think your acidity levels in your muscle, like your hydrogen ions, your lactate, they're all going to be in a pretty similar place to the end of a shorter race. So
I think I was going to say that again, if we talk about like drawbacks, like with this, it's still the cost. I think is it £15 a serving for the Morton?
Yeah, and you buy you comes in for the Morton one, it's 60 quid and that gives you 4 servings. And I think when you're thinking, right, well, I probably want to practice with it once or twice before, then do your race, you're thinking, well, it's actually like 60. I mean, it's not a crazy amount of money. You think about how much you're paying for race entry sometimes. But yeah, if you want to be using it all the time, because that's another thing is I think I've seen it being suggested, but maybe if you're a middle distance athlete, especially for those really hard sessions, maybe you want to take the bicarb then, because then you can actually push your body a little bit more and get a bit more out of yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe recover a little bit quicker as well, because you've not had such extreme acidity. Like maybe that's where it can have even more of an impact, not just during the races, but in training as well.
It's definitely one way you still probably want to be optimizing everything else. So are you training well? Are you using super shoes again? Are you optimizing your warm up? Like we talked about the priming a few episodes ago. Like that's free to do and might offer as much performance.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about, like when I was saying about, it might work for a half marathon. It might work for a half marathon, but if you're someone that is really bad at pacing and half the time blows up, like get that right first before before you try the Morton.
I still haven't I still haven't bought any, and I really would like to give it a go, and I've known about it for a very long time. But I'm just like, £60, like it's a bit of money, isn't it? And especially because I have not been concentrating on my longer distance. Most of the time I'm concentrating on my longer distances. If I was a 5k, if I was, I raced a 5k last week, but if I was more exclusively doing those shorter races, I would be looking at that now. I would definitely be buying that.
I think it's worth mentioning something that at least gets mentioned in some of the research about bicarb is, and it's going to come up again in this episode, but there's very little published work with women participants, and the I guess at least what I've read reading into this is that the thought is that there might be a different response. Part of the mechanism behind it, is related to muscle fiber composition, and generally women have less type 2 muscle fibers, so are potentially going to have less or going to produce less hydrogen ions.
And just less muscle mass as well. I think if anything, I would say it's probably going to be slightly less effective for women. The caveat is I know that British Athletics have got a partnership with Morton, and I know that Keeley has been using Morton before it was even available on the mass market. And I know that a lot of the British Athletics sprinters have all have been using it and are exposed to it, and I've got some arrangement there. And we've done some stuff looking at like 400 meter responses with and without the Morton bicarb, and you can see what you see actually is, but you think, okay, it's buffering acidity, so maybe they've reduced lactate levels, but actually you typically see higher lactate levels because lactate can more easily get out of the blood, and they can just push themselves a little bit harder. And we've seen, just looking at and I know that British Athletics done their own pilot work, and they've looked at like just the pH of the blood as well, and pH they're running faster but with actually higher pH, which means lower acidity in the blood. So yeah, it definitely it's being used by the top people, including women. But I think you're right in that I think it would, on balance, probably have less an effect for women. But in terms of actually what performance advantage is it going to give you, one of the things we came across is that most of the work has been done in cyclists, which I think could well be, because it's easier to do research in cycling. It's easier to control the intensity, the work rate of the athlete, but also you can definitely have less GI discomfort cycling versus running. And that's a reason why it's doing cyclists. But in one paper I found, it was actually orienteers they looked at, but they were good orienteers. And they did a 3.5 kilometer time trial. And basically they had a bicarb. It wasn't Morton, but it was a different bicarb system versus a placebo. And they were 6 seconds faster over 3.5K. And it was just, statistically significant. But we're talking about less than 1%, 0.8% improvement. So if you think about going back to where do you put your focus on? Super shoes might give you 3-4%, maybe more, depending if you're a massive responder or not. Like this bicarb might give you a 1% improvement. That's the sort of, I think this is just taken from one paper, But I think that's the sort of range we're talking about. We're not saying you're going to go 3, 4, 5% better by taking bicarb, but it might be 1%. 6 seconds over 3.5K. Well, that's 5 seconds over 3K, which is a more normal distance to run, or probably like 8 seconds over 5K, maybe a bit more if you're a bit of a slower runner. But yeah, I would, if you're reaching your limit of what you're going to achieve, then yeah, like 6 seconds, 7 seconds, 8 seconds, that's a worthy investment. If you're Keely Hodgkinson, it's going to make you run half a second faster over 800 meters. I'm taking that bicarb. But if there's other things you can concentrate on, then it's up to you if you want to go for it or not. Again, I guess the other caveat is you still can get GI distress with the Morton, so it's not a completely risk-free investment as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind before you go, yeah, I'm going to start using that.
Check the toilet situation of the race that you're using it at.
Yeah, check the toilet situation. Practice it in training first. At race pace intensity is put as well. Yeah, give it a go. Owain did say you could just jump in and take some sodium bicarb and see how that goes. It's probably instead of 15 pound a serving, it's probably about 15 pence a serving, and but you're definitely increasing your chance of having some GI discomfort. But if you're feeling brave, give it a go. The dosage is about 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight, 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight, not 3. That will definitely give you some GI discomfort. 0.3. So it's not very much you're taking. But yeah, that's what Morton uses. That's what's classically used even before Morton in terms of their the older research. Cool. Should we move on?
Yeah, next supplement. So next one's beetroot or nitrate. So nitrate is the supplement. Beetroot is the quite common delivery method, or beetroot shots. You can get nitrate through other sources, but you need a lot. Like if you're using, say, spinach, I think is another one that comes up. You need a really big amount of spinach. Unless you're Popeye, you're probably not eating that much. But yeah, so beetroot shots, they're pretty common. The running store I work in, we sell beetroot shots. Probably selling a lot of them right now with Cardiff Half coming up. You get loads of people coming in and thinking beetroot's going to make all the difference. But the way the mechanism behind this, so nitrate and the components it gets broken down into in your body once you ingest it, it's a vasodilator, especially of your arteries, and your vasculature. So just in general, it reduces your blood pressure because it increases the size of your arteries and reduces or increases the amount of blood flow.
Reduces resistance of your arteries, and basically you've got this much more space for blood to flow around, so your blood pressure drops.
Whether that's you could argue if that's actually a benefit potentially when you're exercising, but that's at least at rest. That's the mechanism, so then from that, there's then quite a clear sort of evidence base that it increases athletic performance. That increase in blood flow then increases the amount of tissue perfusion, so the amount of blood actually getting into especially like skeletal muscle when you're exercising, and just increases the amount of oxygen delivery to that skeletal muscle. Then there's also some evidence showing that it actually increases the muscle function as well. So you have this sort of twofold benefit potentially going on, where skeletal muscle can do the same amount of work with a reduced oxygen cost, but also you're able to get more oxygen to that skeletal muscle. So that's sort of the mechanism behind it. You can deliver more oxygen to your muscles, but also not actually need as much oxygen to do the same amount of work. That it generally gets shown in sort of high intensity exercise. That's where a lot of the work has been done and where potentially a lot of the benefit lies. But then there seems to be some benefits to longer endurance exercise as well. I think the interesting thing about beetroot especially is that it seems to work differently in different populations with different training statuses, which is where maybe I think a lot of the research is at now, is picking apart who actually gets the benefit of beetroot. It's not the same across the entire, it's not the same, you know, someone that's just starting Couch to 5K isn't going to have the same benefit as Dan. It's going to be different.
Or yourself. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the nitrates are interesting because it's similar to bicarb, but actually, like, what happens is we take in the nitrates in the form of beetroot juice normally, right? But actually, bacteria in your mouth break that down into nitrite, and then actually within the body it gets broken down to nitric oxides, and that nitric oxide is like the active ingredient. That's the thing that's causing the vasodilation. But actually, nitric oxide is this mechanism goes on within our body just normally. So we produce nitric oxide in our blood vessels as a vasodilator, and so the idea is that actually those people who are fitter already have good nitric oxide stores and can produce nitric oxide very quickly in response to exercise. And so they're already getting this vasodilatory response and don't really need to supplement by taking in effectively more nitric oxides. And that's where the research has got up to now. But actually, if you are Eliud Kipchoge, you probably don't. Well, Eliud Kipchoge, still for now, but certainly a few years ago, you're probably not going to get that much from taking beetroot juice. But at the same time, if you're less fit or if you're newer to aerobic exercise, you can get actually a reasonably big benefit from taking nitric oxide. And as Owain said, vasodilator, and that's probably going to be good for aerobic activities, and that you can get there's a better blood supply to your muscles, and you're going to get a better oxygen supply to your muscles, an increased oxygen supply to your muscles. But also, if you're doing more anaerobic type work or high intensity work, then you're going to be better at taking away that acidity that you were talking about in terms of the hydrogen ions for where bicarb is effective as well. So it's just we're increasing not just the oxygen supply but the blood supply, so we can increase the flow of oxygen, but also glucose, fatty acids, other fuels for the muscle, but we can also take away waste products and transport lactate to other parts of the body as well. So increased capillarization, increased blood flow to the muscles is a really good adaptation we have, and it's one we can influence acutely by taking bicarb. But also, if you do long-term training, one of the major adaptations we get is capillarization of a muscle, which basically means each muscle fiber is in contact with more of the tiny blood vessels that surround it, and so there's just a better blood supply to the muscle. And that's associated with thresholds and things like that. So actually, if someone's got better capillarization of their muscles, they tend to have, that's associated with better thresholds, because there's just a better exchange of oxygen, glucose, waste products, etc. So yeah, that is yeah, I think it's got enough. There's definitely enough research to say, yeah, it can make a difference. This is where I ran out of time, so I don't know what sort of performance gain we're getting. And I think we've alluded to already. We've already said it's probably going to be more effective for someone who's less well trained compared to someone who's already who's running at a high level already. But
yeah, I was going to say there's other sort of caveats. There's quite a big individual response because everyone has a quite individualized microbiome. So in terms of the amount you have to take individually and the response you get individually, that's going to vary it. Again, talking about male versus female response, with this, there's actually some evidence that it might be more beneficial for women. Generally have lower levels of nitric oxide. So if you can supplement that with some beetroot, then that might have a bigger benefit. But it hasn't been looked at across different menstrual cycle phases, and it's been found that there's different vascular function across the menstrual cycle. So you would then think that nitric oxide is going to work differently across the menstrual cycle as well. It's not been looked into, so I guess it's a bit cheaper. So maybe you could sort of do your own N of 1 bit of research if you want to want to have a go.
It's probably going to be very tricky to pull out those small effect sizes, small differences you're going to have across a menstrual cycle or between people, which is why it's, we think bicarb, but we think that nitrates, beetroot juice, we think it does work, but like how much of a benefit you're going to get from it, and actually who's going to get the biggest benefit is probably still pretty tricky to find out. I think there's definitely enough evidence to suggest that but if you're fitter, you're not going to get as much out of it. But then there's also things about the dosage, like there's I know at one point it seemed to be very much you wanted a loading dose, so you'd be taking it once a day for a week before your competition and then on the morning of. But I don't know where we've got to up to. I've also seen, but I think it's also common to take it an hour before the start, and I don't think there's much to say that the loading dose in a week prior actually is any more effective than just taking it once before. Yeah, this is my understanding.
I saw in one of the papers I read it suggested sort of 2 to 3 hours before exercise will give you the highest plasma nitric oxide levels, but again, it's going to vary by individual. The dosage recommended was about 7.5 milligrams per kilo of body weight. One of the things that got mentioned, it's probably worth mentioning if it came up in research, is that there's quite a big issue with the amount of actual content you get in a beetroot shot. With you have the same size beetroot shot, but there's a massive variation in terms of how much nitrate you get in it. So that's just worth looking into as well. Like especially if you're using 2 different brands, make sure they actually have the similar amounts of nitrate in. I think it's just an issue in general with the supplement industry, isn't it, that it's far less regulated than food.
And it's very, I think, especially with something like that, because like with they are processing it from a natural source, which is beetroot, and actually the beetroot content is going to vary from beetroot to beetroot. I imagine I'm not a specialist in this area, but I imagine the different growing conditions and the soil quality and the light.
Soil quality gets mentioned, and that's getting mentioned in a physiology paper, which is weird anyway, but it's going to be worth bearing in mind. Checking.
But I would say that that's something that's actually got enough evidence to say it's worth trying. There aren't too many, there's not really side effects associated with it. You're going to have a stool that looks quite pink, and you might have some pink wee, but you can cope with that. I imagine most people can cope with that. It's not really associated with GI discomfort, as is bicarb is, and it's affordable. I think a shot is about £2, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, I'd say also it doesn't taste very nice. At least I don't think it tastes very nice. But
no, because they concentrate it so much.
Yeah, it tastes like dirt to me. But
yeah, it does taste a bit like dirt. I have in the past used it. I haven't for a few years, partly because of my research and partly because it doesn't affect well-trained people as much. But also, it's just I remember having to root around the shop to try and find beetroot juice, and then it doesn't taste the best, and but I do think it's definitely worth playing around with, and again it's low risk, and it could give you a % improvement, that sort of ballpark, I would say, which is not to be sniffed at if it's an easy win without low risks. I think one, if you are going to use it yourself, the other caveat, but I think to thing that's been found, which is interesting, is but because it's bacteria in the mouth are important for breaking the nitrates down into nitrites. If you take mouthwash regularly, the mat actually kills or certainly affects your microbiome within your mouth, and that's been shown to reduce the nitric oxide response that you get. How much nitric oxide is available, bioavailability in the blood is reduced, and so you might have to back off on your mouthwash in a week or so prior if you're going to use it for a competition. Brushing your teeth, apparently that seems to be fine, but excessive use of mouthwash, that's going to reduce or completely get rid of any benefit that you might have. So just a practical takeaway there. Nice. So I think we get into realms of actually, you should go try that. I would say give that a go. We've got one more to talk about. What are we finishing with, Owain?
So we're finishing with caffeine, the cheapest of all of these. probably, I mean, not giving it away, but probably the most beneficial as well, or at least, most beneficial for how much it costs. Yeah, so caffeine, it's a central nervous system stimulator. So the most widely accepted sort of mechanism of how this works is it basically reduces your rating of perceived exertion of exercise because of its effect on your central nervous system. There's then also sort of evidence suggesting it might affect muscle calcium levels. Those affect force production, so it keeps those levels higher for longer. You need calcium for muscles to contract. So if you can keep those levels higher for longer, you can produce more force over a longer amount of time. And then it also interacts with what we just talked about, nitric oxide and potassium. So it's a vasodilator as well. And then, yeah, affects perfusion and oxygen delivery. And then the final one to mention, with caffeine, it's a placebo in terms of everyone, I think, or the vast majority of people think that having caffeine has a benefit. So then it works as a placebo. There's a lot of work looking at the effect of placebo, especially on caffeine. So, where someone's given a drink and they're told it has caffeine in it, it has a benefit in terms of exercise performance, even though there's no caffeine present. So you have the physiological sort of mechanisms behind how it works, but then just you feel better when you have your morning coffee.
And it's also, as a placebo, it's good because caffeine has got a distinctive, that bitter taste you have in a coffee is associated with is because of the caffeine content. Caffeine's got a bitter taste, and so if you're having caffeine most of the time, unless it's mixed in with gels and stuff like that. But
even gels, caffeine gels, I think taste horrible. But
yeah, it's not a great, outside of coffee, which I love, it's not a great taste. If you start popping Pro Plus tablets, it's not you don't go, this is lovely. I mean, it's not horrendous, but it's not it's better than taking probably beetroot juice. But yeah, I mean, caffeine is an interesting one because it affects the central nervous system, and the central nervous system literally does everything. It seems to have multiple effects, but it's also hard to tease apart what's placebo, I think, and what is the direct effects of caffeine. And the other interesting thing about caffeine is because it improves. It basically, I've literally got Wikipedia open here, so I had to remind myself. I was 90% confident, but yeah, it basically increases the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is how nerves send a message across the gap between different nerves. So it basically speeds up conduction between nerves, and as well as having the effects on our perceived exertion during exercise, it's also been shown to have effects in terms of sprint performance, like jump performance, like all these explosive sports where actually our perceived exertion isn't a factor. You're not really having perceived fatigue during a counter movement jump, for example, but actually it's speeding up the neurotransmitter, the what am I trying to say? The conduction along the nerve, and so but actually you can be more explosive. So caffeine seems to be generally performance enhancing. It does seem to have a bigger effect on endurance versus the speed and power stuff, probably because you're having a sort of combined effect of perceived exertion and some of the neuromuscular qualities as well. But yeah, caffeine works. Definitely.
Some big side effects that you need to take into account. So it's going to affect your sleep if you take it late at night. If you're racing in the evening and you have caffeine, you're probably not going to sleep well that night. If you get the dosage wrong, it can have some quite big side effects as well. I see 9 milligrams per kilo of body weight is sort of anything above that, you're going to have probably quite a lot of anxiety and not feel very good. And then some of the timing of caffeine is potentially quite hard to manage. It's the uptake happens at different speeds depending on how you ingest the caffeine. So, a cup of coffee with the same amount of caffeine ingested, a cup of coffee is going to produce higher levels in your blood quicker than a bottle of Coke. And then, I mean, in the research, I couldn't find much about gels. So, I assume that a gel would be a quicker uptake than a cup of coffee. We were talking about this before, and we were saying the caffeine gum has a very quick uptake, and a gel is probably somewhere between caffeine gum and a coffee. So
yeah, so
maybe 20
caffeine
minutes.
gum, you can actually, instead of having to get the caffeine into you, because obviously you don't swallow the gum, so the caffeine doesn't actually have to get into your stomach. It can cross like the linings of your mouth, so your mucosal membrane. And so actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is we're talking like 5-10 minutes and caffeine's in your system.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
Whereas like instead of coffee, it's more like an hour. The thing with caffeine as well is that it's, unless the half-life of caffeine is quite long. So like that's why people say, oh, don't take caffeine, don't have a cup of coffee after 3 o'clock or whatever, because you won't sleep. And that's because caffeine sticks around in your system quite long. So I mean, that's good in terms of like, right, if I'm doing a marathon or I'm doing a longer event, I don't need to be taking caffeine, all the time to try and keep it at a high level, because it's going to stay in your system for a while. You might want to take some in the last half hour of a race, depending on how long you think that caffeine's going to take to get in your system, because it might just boost those levels and give you a psychological lift and reduce that RPE. But for me, I tend to just take caffeine before I start. But my favorite way of taking caffeine would be to have a coffee, and you don't know how much caffeine's in that coffee.
Yeah.
You want to, the guideline, I think it's a pretty good idea, but you want to be taking 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Yeah. Get the units right. Yeah. 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. If you're not taking over 3, you're probably not going to benefit. If you're taking up to 9, or over 6, then you're increasing the chances of having side effects like the jitters and actually just being too stimulated, overly stimulated, and then you don't make good decisions. And yeah, you have the anxiety type feeling of like your heart is racing, and that's not what you want. I think it's you don't want to be overstimulated going into a race. You want to be in that sweet spot. So maybe again, I think that's the thing to say. Like if you're someone who gets you get anxiety around racing anyway, and you're getting nerves, and actually you feel like you're having those you're overstimulated before you race, then maybe caffeine isn't the one for you. Because you're going to just increase those tendencies. And we're not talking about massive performance advantages by taking caffeine versus not taking the caffeine. And I think if you become overstimulated and you just haven't got the headspace to perform well, then that's going to have a much bigger impact on your performance than did you take caffeine or not. So
yeah, whatever benefit you might get from it, if you go out in your marathon too hard, it's gonna it's not going to work. There was a mention in some of the research I did of it potentially having a bigger effect when you're in a fatigued state. So just to your point as well of having maybe having your caffeine gel later in the race, like that might be another reason to do so. If you're going to be most fatigued in a marathon, if you're taking 3 hours, then in the last hour. So yeah, maybe you have your caffeine gel at sort of an hour 45 to 2 hours into the race. That you're still going to have high levels of caffeine sort of after you finish the race, but you're going to have the highest levels when you are most fatigued, and that might be the biggest benefit. And yeah, like we said, reduces your RPE slightly as well, rather than starting and having a caffeine gel 5k in, like that way you're trying to be sort of relaxed and not too overstimulated. Actually, might be the best effect might be later in the race.
Yeah, and I think I can't quote the paper now, but I'm pretty positive that caffeine, caffeine's gonna have a bigger effect when you're more fatigued in terms of where you are in the race. But actually, also, when you're doing a race, you're pretty stimulated anyway in terms of you've got high levels of adrenaline. Your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, switched on, ready to go. And yeah, caffeine's going to raise that a little bit, but actually, caffeine might have a bigger impact on actually during training, where you probably are suboptimally prepared. You're not fresh, you're not tapered. You might have got up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get your training session in, and actually, caffeine might have a better effect on your race performance indirectly by improving your training quality. So when you need to go and do that hard session, but you're actually you're not feeling it today, you're tired, you've had a big training week, you've got kids, so you're a bit sleep deprived, or you've had to get up early in the morning to run, all these sort of things, then that's when actually caffeine could make a training session more tolerable. You're more likely to be able to push the intensity up to where you need it to be, or just get the session done when maybe you wouldn't get the session done. So I think, caffeine is definitely one where it can have multiple effects. I think it's just being smart with its use. I think there used to be the idea that you'd get like immune to caffeine, and like you'd get a reduced response if you were taking it all the time. But I think that doesn't seem to really be the case. It doesn't matter as long as you will respond to caffeine all the time. Maybe if you're chronically literally a 5 cups of coffee a day kind of person, then maybe you have a different response. But yeah, I think even if you're taking caffeine regularly, like most people are, you're still, if you're getting 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram of body weight, you're still going to have a benefit from that. But yeah, I think, should we round that up?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it.
Unless there's anything you want to say on caffeine, any closing remarks?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I think like with all of these, like use them, like think about how you're using them. Like you're saying with the training, like, yeah, if you're getting up at 6 a.m., then yeah, caffeine probably will have an impact on your training. If you're going to the track to do a session at 7 p.m., maybe don't take the caffeine, because whatever benefit it gives you in the session, it's going to take away from it.
In your recovery, it's bad sleep. You're not going to sleep.
Yeah.
I think it's just trying to think about what is this? What am I taking? What is it actually going to do? What's the risk versus reward, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I mean, like we've gone through we've started with the highest price a supplement or an accessory in the headbands. We've pretty much decided, not us decided, but the research indicates that doesn't really do very much. Caffeine, on the other hand, is very cheap and definitely does help. Right, that's one of the. So there's always hype around new products, new nutritional supplements. What's the one we saw the other day that was it was willow bark, wasn't it? Tree bark.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's lots of false claims around nutrition, and actually the price of it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to give you the biggest benefit. We've in this podcast, I believe we've demonstrated the inverse, in that the one that's got the most evidence and it's probably going to give the biggest response is caffeine. And caffeine, even if you're taking it in gel form, in a tablet form, if you're taking it and getting a latte from Starbucks or whatever retailer you want to go to, it's still a lot cheaper than taking a Morton, for example. And probably going to give you as good an effect, maybe more, but without the side effects, unless you take in excessive amounts of caffeine, in which case that's on you. But yeah, so just being mindful. So we chose the headbands and the Bicarb because it's topical. The Beetroot is still quite topical, and caffeine, but caffeine and the nitrates because they've got good evidence base behind them. If there's anything else you want us to go into, just let us know. We chose them because we think, like I said, we think there's some evidence behind them, or they're topical, and we think we need to tell people that, you shouldn't go spend £200 on a headband. But there's lots of other stuff out there that may or may not have some benefits. If you'd like us to dig into them, just send us a message.
Let us know on Twitter or put it in our Strava, comment on our Stravas.
Yeah, I love a Strava.
That's what you want to hear.
We may well do a second nutrition supplement podcast at some point. I think there's still a few, mostly that I'd like to disprove and say don't go buy that because there's a lot of junk out there. But I think there are a couple which may have some benefits. So yeah, let us know. I finished last episode with a plug about the Sport Physiology Hub. Yeah, we've got one of them in already, so I won't labour the point. But if you want exercise testing, come and look us up, Sport Physiology Hub. I'll put another link in the show notes. I've got another plug today, though, which is I'm going to start offering online coaching. So I've been coaching on and off for quite a few years now, but I feel like I've now got the capacity to start taking on a few clients. I want to do it properly. I'm not one of these social media influencers who's going to charge you a fortune for a bad service. I really want to do this properly, so I'm only going to take on 5 clients. It's not going to be a first come, first serve basis. How I'm going to do it is, but I'm going to give you my email address now. I'll put it in the show notes. If you're interested in coaching, then send me an email. Tell me about yourself. I would like to know, what are your goals? What's your training look like at the minute? What are your ambitions? Because what I don't want is, I don't want to take advantage of people. If someone's training 3 or 4 times a week, I don't want to charge them to basically say you need to run a few more times a week and you'll get better. Like that's unfair on me. It's unfair on you, the athlete. Like if your training is just actually you just need to do a little bit more. Or if you're not doing any intensity, add a little bit of intensity and that's going to make you better. Like I'm pretty good. I'm people message me quite a lot and I will give you advice for free, but actually I want to help you get to your next level, get the most out of yourself. So what I'm going to offer is, as I said, a really good bespoke service. Only 5 clients, so I can give you the attention you deserve and you need. Monthly calls, so video call, phone call, whatever's easiest for you, at least once a month. Unlimited WhatsApp, unlimited program adjustments. Programs will be given via Training Peaks. You're going to get a premium account, which is £100 a year equivalent. So if you haven't used Training Peaks before, it's just a platform where I can basically prescribe the training on an app or computer-based or via the computer. You can see the training there. You can then upload your training automatically uploads from your Garmin, from your whatever watch you're using. And so I can see your GPS data, your heart rate data. I can use it to look at your training zones, how much time you're spending in each of your training zones. And it's just a really nice way of getting a good amount of data and conveying information very easily and quickly. As part of the package, you also get a 30% discount on testing at the Sport Physiology Hub. So up to 4 times a year, you can get a 30% discount on our services. That's worth £170 a year. I've got a dramatic pause here. So that's the service I'm going to offer. Right, it's not going to be super cheap. I'm marketing it as £120 a month, which I understand is a lot of money, but I want to give you a really, really good service. If you don't know a bit about me, hopefully you do, because you'll be listening to this podcast. But I've got an undergraduate degree in human physiology, a master's degree in sport physiology. I've just completed my PhD, which is literally looking at running performance. My day job is trying to make people faster, testing in the lab, working with performance athletes. I was counting up the other day. I think I'm on my 5th Olympian now that I've worked with, and day to day.
Mention the amount of Olympians that you've worked with.
Yeah, so I'm working, supporting their coaches, supporting those athletes on a day-to-day basis. So I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I think I know my stuff. I'm also practicing it myself. I am an athlete, still trying to run as fast as I can, 2:15 marathon best. In terms of like what people are focusing on, like I've raced through every distance from 800 meters up to the 50K. So I've got first-hand experience and helped athletes who are tackling distances, as I said, even down to 400 meters. I wouldn't say I'm a 400 meter coach. And I think if you're a 400 meter athlete, I doubt there's many 400 meter athletes listening to this podcast. I would say go find a sprints coach. But I have worked with those kinds of athletes, and I've worked with ultra athletes as well. So if you're interested, send me an email. My email is dan-nash@outlook.com. I will put dan-nash@outlook.com. I'll put that in the show notes. If you are interested, send me an email by September the 1st. I will reply to everybody, even if you're not selected. And I will give you, if you're not selected, I'll also give you a bit of training advice as well. So do get in contact. Hopefully that sounds interesting to you. If you've got any questions, obviously, it's a big commitment, that sort of money. I do appreciate that, but it's only because I want to actually make sure that it's a really good service for you, and that's the sort of time and effort it takes, I think, to actually justify that. But if you've got any questions, speculative inquiries, just drop me an email, message me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Strava, message me, Instagram, message me, whatever's easiest for you. So that's it. we'll have another podcast coming out in the next couple of weeks. Again, let us know if there's anything you particularly want to listen to. Anything else, Owain?
That's it for me.
No, cool. Cheers very much. Thanks for listening. Take care. See you soon.